Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. It appears that engineers have finally figured out exactly what is making the Red Bull RB19 just so fast. It comes down to the geometry of their suspension, which provides massive advantages in race pace, but with potential disadvantages in qualifying and if they can't get the setup perfect. Their car is very fast, other teams might take some inspiration from what we're about to discuss, but it could mean that on sprint weekends such as in Baku, Red Bull might not have such a good time. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Thanks also for 20,000 subs. Just smashed through that milestone just a couple of days ago. I'm only just getting started, baby. So definitely hit the sub button if you haven't already. First of all, big update on the sprint format in Baku, because it was confirmed the other day that the Saturday sprint and the qualifying just for the sprint is going to be a separate occasion. If you guys missed the news, Friday practice happened as normal. Friday qualifying happens as normal, but that's not for the sprint race order. That's for the Sunday starting order. And then on Saturday, there's a separate qualifying session just for the sprints, which is just for points and is meaningless for the starting position on Sunday. I think this is better because it encourages the drivers to take more risk, but it's kind of pointless for the guys all the way at the very back. However, the qualifying for that session for qualifying is not a one-shot quali as they used to do back in the day, but Q3 is going to be something like 3 or 4 minutes long. So there's going to be, it's basically one lap. You get one chance in Q3 to qualify, so it's kind of one shot in a way that there's no 2 laps in the final set of qualifying. It's you go out, you do a lap, and that's it. So, you know, that's basically what's happening there. The teams have agreed to it, and that's going to be implemented in Baku. Ferrari also up to their usual tricks, looking to get Carlos Sainz reinstated into P4. They're not happy with how their penalty was handed out, and you can understand why, right? Especially looking back on the weekends. Fred Vasseur, the team principal, says, "We would like to be heard and have a constructive discussion." I don't know if they're super expecting Sainz's penalty to get overturned, but of course Sainz wants that to happen, as will Ferrari. We certainly go there to reverse the decision, but we also want to eliminate inconsistency. In the same corner, which is true, there were 3 accidents judged differently. Gasly Ocon was delivered no penalty right after the race, controversially I would say. Sargent's one wasn't even looked at, and Carlos Sainz was given a 5-second penalty. So I do agree in part that yes, Sainz was at fault I think for that incident. There's extenuating circumstances where you could say that he shouldn't get a penalty, especially when you look at the fact that there was so much chaos there, and basically no one got punished apart from Sainz. Like Alonso got away with it, like Stroll got away with it right after going off in turn 3. So you know, only Sainz was punished, especially with other similar incidents. You've got to think that they've got a reasonable case here. Whether they'll get anywhere, I guess we'll see. Also, I feel bad for Charles Leclerc, man. He's had a terrible start to the season, and even he says, like, over the last couple of days here, his main priority now is just to finish a race, not even to win a race, not to win a championship, but just to finish. I mean, it's kind of sad to think about. And, I mean, look, I'm sure his season will turn around. The Ferrari is still okay, but it's not spectacular by any means, especially compared to the Red Bull, and we'll discuss why in a few minutes' time. So, yeah, hopefully Leclerc's season goes up from here. But every race, he must be thinking, damn, like, could I really stay at this team too much longer? There was also some, you know, Fred Vasseur says it's not excuses, but he does say that the penalty that Red Bull were given for breaching the cap in 2021 was far too light. If you ask me if the penalty was too light, I would say yes. Going on to say, I don't think it was a penalty at all. I think it was a very low penalty. If you consider that the teams will improve around about 1 second over the season in terms of aero, you get the penalty of 10% of this, it's 1/10 of a second, and it's not a linear progression, it's probably less, so you're allowed to spend this money somewhere else. And I think he's got a fair point, right? That final 10% of the aero testing time that's been reduced from Red Bull's allocation is kind of the final 10% of, you know, there's diminishing returns, right, on the additional time. So it hasn't affected them, obviously, at the start of the season. The theory was that by the time they get to, you know, late this season, start of next season, you might see the implication of that penalty. So far, I don't think anyone really expected to see that penalty actually bite at all, and we're only 3 races in. So I guess maybe more time will actually see if there was any impact from that penalty. But as he says, yeah, the penalty is way too light, and I'm sure the other teams agree based on what the Red Bull is achieving so far this season. Now, yesterday I mentioned that rumours were circulating that Ferrari were going to scrap this car concept and converge with the Red Bull model come pretty much Barcelona, right? Around about the 8th, 9th race of the season. Now, apparently, though, according to Giuliano De Chesa, that's not the case. And the issue is that Ferrari had a big development plan in place with this car for the season. Mercedes knew their car wasn't good before the season even began because of errors they made in the wind tunnel over the winter that they then realised and needed to change tack. Ferrari thought their car was great coming to the first race, and it kind of isn't. So that's their issue, that they don't have infinite money. So they're going to bring upgrades all the way to Barcelona to understand understand the potential of this concept, but, there's mixed reports really, because some say they're going to go to a B-spec version and copy Red Bull mid-season. Some say because they've got the development program set out before the season began, they can't throw it all away. They've put a lot of development time and resources into it, and they won't be a B-spec as the Mercedes basically will be, to our understanding, come Imola. Now, there were some upgrades planned for Barcelona that are now going to arrive a couple of races earlier, so that's, I guess, a positive. But Ferrari evidently have a long way to go and a long way to improve, and even Vasseur says in a straight line, the delta there with the DRS Open is, massive, right, what Red Bull are able to achieve in a straight line, and he says, look, there's something that they've done different, some magic that Red Bull have unlocked that's able to give them advantage, and we'll discuss what that might be right here. So there is an upgrade arriving for Red Bull again in Baku. Now, most teams aren't bringing much to Baku, I don't think, but Red Bull are, and they're bringing an upgrade which is reportedly worth 0.2 of a second. So, I mean, that's pretty scary, right? I think this upgrade was said a couple of weeks ago to be worth 0.3. So, if it's only 0.2, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, right? Because their car is just so much quicker than anyone. If it makes their car 0.2 slower, it's not going to make a difference to who's going to win that Grand Prix weekend. But there was a very interesting article here from Mark Hughes at the Motorsport magazine on exactly what is going on to give Red Bull this advantage. And it seems like the issue that caught out Checo Perez was effectively a byproduct of what's allowing their car to be so good. It has its advantages, what they're doing with their geometry of the suspension, but it also has its disadvantages. And we know that Red Bull are very much against sprint weekends in general. Verstappen hates them. Like, Horner has said that he doesn't want any changes to the format. And every time, pretty much, that Red Bull have gone to a sprint, they've had that one practice session to sell out their car, and they've got it marginally wrong, and it's affected their weekend. I think, okay, Imola last year, they got away with it, but the majority of times they go to a sprint weekend, they seem to take a good 2-3 practice sessions, Red Bull, to get their car set up correctly. When they do, it's unbelievable, but when they get it wrong, it does affect the performance. We saw it last year, and it might carry over this year, given what we're about to discuss. So Mark Hughes talks about the suspension of the car being the key reason why they've been able to put an advantage on the field, even after, we expected the field to converge this season. They've put a further advantage on it. Now, Newey, as he does, has designed their suspension, and already last year there was an extreme degree of anti-dive on the front. Now, they've continued this anti-dive and anti-squat suspension setup into this year, and before I explain exactly what that means, to the best of my understanding, that most cars are running 15 degrees of anti-dive, as measured as he describes. The Red Bull runs 45 degrees, so they're running 3 times more of this feature of the suspension than the other cars are. So basically, when the car brakes, it will dive forward to a certain degree. Right? You can imagine that when it's braking, there's more weight over the front wheels, more pressure over the front wheels, and therefore the car will dive somewhat and lean forward over those front wheels. And the same when it accelerates, it will lean back over the suspension. So the dive is called the dive, and the the leaning back when accelerating is called the squat. Now, you can set up the geometry of the suspension to prevent this from happening and keep the car as flat as they possibly can. And this is what Red Bull are doing. Now, this limits the center of pressure moving around too much when the car is being driven, which gives a big advantage. It gives advantage in terms of consistency of the ballast when braking, entry and mid-corner phases, allows you to run the car lower as well, which increases downforce generated by the underfloor of the car. It also means that the car, as a result, will spark way more down the straights than others, which the Red Bull does, and because it generates more downforce by being closer to the ground because they can get away with it, it also has more DRS advantage because they're more downforce they're getting rid of. So the symptoms of the Red Bull points towards this is what they're able to achieve. The issue is it also has its downsides, right? Those are the advantages, but a lot of anti-dive geometry means that the front tyres are not being loaded up as quickly, which makes it very easy to lock the front brakes. And what did we see a lot of the time there in Australia? Even Verstappen did it in the race, but we saw it certainly in FP3 for Checo Perez and in qualifying for him as well, that there was a lot of locking of the front tyres, and obviously it spelled the end of Perez's qualifying session. So Red Bull might have found a way to kind of alleviate this and make such extreme angles of anti-drive actually feasible that other teams seemingly can't. But it's a bit of a question whether how they exactly achieve this, but it does seem to take a fair bit of setting up, and if they don't have much setup time, they seem to struggle here. So this might well be the source of the magic that Red Bull are able to unlock, and it does sound plausible to me given the fact that the symptoms of this setup are what we see from the Red Bull car. Now, as he says also, another trait of such extreme anti-dive would be the reluctance to bring the front tyres up to temperature as quickly as other cars, and we saw that in qualifying, and we saw that in the race, right? At the start of the race, Verstappen got off the line poorly compared to Russell, Hamilton got him into turn 3, and it took a good, 2-3 laps before Russell actually started getting pegged back by Verstappen, right? Russell was pulling going away because Verstappen's tyres weren't quite there at the start. And that's a bit of a surprise, but that seems to be another consequence of this setup decision, which is giving them a huge race pace advantage. It means that they are slower in qualifying though, and a smooth surface on a cool track would bring these downsides out, which made the Red Bull look worse than it would be. So other circuits, I mean, worse than it would be, and it was already absolutely rapid. So, you know, the Red Bull fundamentally is great pretty much in every aspect, but it might well be this anti-dive, anti-squat suspension that Adrian Newey has come up with, and however they're able to deal with the downsides better than other cars, which is giving them the source of their real edge here. The issue is though that it does have some potential disadvantages in certain track conditions, and also if you get limited setup time, let's say, as happened on sprint weekends. So it does seem like this carries some downsides with it, but fundamentally their car is rapid as a result of it, right? So other teams I'm sure will have understood this by now and will be trying to realize how they can make it happen as well, and whether they can alter how they organize their suspension to generate a similar effect without the downsides that Red Bull might presently be experiencing to a certain degree. And also Russell says that he claimed after, Bahrain, that Red Bull would win every race this season. They have in fairness won the first 3, but he wants to reassess after Mercedes bring their upgrades, and whether he believes that at that point they can actually feasibly challenge the Red Bull. But let's be honest here, if this secret advantage, secret sauce the Red Bull have is maintained and other teams can't handle it, then it's unlikely any team is going to be able to get there anytime soon at least. And just one final positive story to mention, with Audi joining F1 in 2026, there have been a lot of rumours going around, and Michael Schmidt of Mema says it's looking pretty good for a return of the German Grand Prix. Been quite a while since we had one now. Hockenheim was a fan favourite circuit, really, right, in Germany. Some classic races there over the years, and we might be going back there again in a few years' time. But very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.